In this episode, you'll discover the 3 weather data points you need for deciding if you will row tomorrow morning.
Feel the grip of the oar handle, smooth yet firm in your hands. Taste the salt of your own sweat and the occasional splash of water. It's all part of the journey. Welcome to another episode of Faster Masters Rowing Radio. Each week, our host, Masters rowing coach Rebecca Caro, dives deep into the world of Masters rowing. Whether you're on the water or in the gym, join us to become a faster master. Let's go rowing.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Faster Masters Rowing Radio. I'm Rebecca Caro, and today we're going to talk about the weather. Rowing is such a weather-dependent sport. We all know that there are times when you can't go rowing and times that you can. But mostly we want to know in advance whether or not we're going to be able to row the next day. This is where weather apps come in. We're really fortunate that modern technology has put detailed weather reporting into an app on our phone, which we can localize. And you will probably know quite a lot of the local weather patterns where you live, whether unconsciously or consciously. But importantly, what are the things that you need to look out for when deciding whether or not you're going to be able to row? There are a few key data points. So the nice and easy ones: will it be sunny? Will it be raining? Will it be cloudy? Maybe will there be a thunderstorm? The really important one: what's the wind speed and what is the wind direction? Those two are probably the most critical pieces of information that you need. You might then also add on top of that temperature, air temperature, possibly water temperature if that's a critical factor where you live, and tide if you row on a tidal waterway. Now, when I first started using weather apps, I never used the app that was called Weather because it didn't have those particular detailed data points that I needed. And so we found weather apps that were designed mostly for sailing. One is called WindFinder. Self-evidently, sailors try to find wind, whereas I think a rowing app would be called Wind Avoider. And of course, another called WindGuru. And these have various layers of information. One of them does a graph where you can see the approaching depressions, the wind direction, how they rotate around depressions as they move, and that's animated over time. The other just has a list of data points every 3 hours. So for us, we have a couple of really critical things that we need to know. On the waterway where I row, if the wind speed is coming from the east, it's quite hard for us to go rowing if it's above about 10 knots, because that is directly blowing waves onto the pontoon. And because it's an open body of water, the waves get higher and higher and higher over distance. And there's 1.2 kilometers of distance for it to build up its waves before it hits the place where we boat. We're also fortunate that we have high sides to our lake. It's a volcanic crater, and so the ground slopes upwards. And that means that we often get a wind shadow. So our circulation pattern on the waterway and our consideration of the weather, also when we look at wind direction, we look to see where the wind shadow will be. And we know the different wind directions and where we're likely to be able to row. So direction for us is a very important piece of information. Now, the wind speed, in general, 12 knots is just fine for rowing big boats. You may not enjoy it if you're in a single scull, but if you can find that wind shadow, you would be okay in a single scull in a 12-knot wind. But there's another layer that sits on top of that, because wind is rarely constant, it gusts. And so the WindFinder app has a different graphic that indicates maximal wind speed and the base wind speed. And that's really useful for us, because if we know that it's gusting, but it's only going up a couple of knots, that's fine. But sometimes it'll say that the base wind speed is 10, but it's gusting up to 15 or 18 knots. And you can see that that provides quite a different nuance in terms of our interpretation of the data and what's useful for us. Our second place where we row is tidal. And so knowing the tides and the times of high and low tide are really useful, because naturally enough, there are hazards that are exposed at low tide that aren't exposed at high tide. And again, that waterway has similar places that are sheltered, where if the wind's in a particular direction, you can still row there, and other places where it's more exposed and not so friendly towards rowers. Now, last year, for the first time, we heard about a new weather app that's called YR. It's put out by the Norwegian company. And here's the interesting thing about it. Apparently, all of these weather apps use the same base data points for their weather interpretation. The thing that's different is the algorithm that they put them through in order to forecast ahead of time. Now, we know where we live that often the weather moves through faster than is forecast. So you might have high winds that are dropping off in the early morning. We know that there's a reasonable chance that we still will be able to row, even though the forecast numbers are not looking too friendly. We found this YR app to be much more accurate than the others. And unlike WindFinder, it gives hourly updates rather than in 3-hour increments. And that's, of course, quite significant. When you're only rowing for an hour or an hour and a half, you need to know whether or not you're likely to be able to get on the water. And so I commend it to you. As far as I know, it was a free app. Go and have a look and see whether it works for you. And one tiny little piece of advice for everybody. When you think the weather's going to be marginal, we have found that deciding, getting to the rowing club and then making your decision about whether to row is better than trying to decide the night before. And this is for all the reasons that I've just mentioned, that weather is forecast and that's not accurate, and what's actually happening when you're there is the important piece of data. And we have a mantra: decide in the shed, not in bed. Till next time.
We are part of the RowingChat podcast network. Please tell your fellow rowers about the show. If you've learned just one helpful thing from today's episode, please consider supporting the show for as little as $1 per month by visiting fastermastersrowing.com/podcast.